hello. Thank you for joining us today on Christ, Culture, and Coffee. And we are back this week with a very special guest of ours, and we're super excited to discuss the topic for today.
Yeah, we're joined once again by our good friend, Marcia Montenegro. Marcia is actually a former New Age astrologer who is now a Christian, and she has a ministry reaching out to people who are caught up in the New Age and caught up in the occult. And Marcia, we are so thankful that you are here to kind of talk to us about your testimony and talk through what the New Age is and how we as Christians can help people not to get trapped into it.
Well, hi. Thank you so much, Tyler and Robbie, for having me and just giving me this opportunity to share all this information.
Yep, we're glad you're
you.
back. Yeah, we had such a good time with you when you were on talking about the Enneagram, and this is going to be just great to talk through your journey and your testimony and how God has brought you to this point in your life. So now, before we do that, we want to talk about a coffee tip.
Yes.
And what is our tip for our listeners today, Tyler?
Yeah, the tip is these beautiful mugs that you see us drinking coffee out of here.
This could be yours.
It could be yours.
This could be yours.
Yeah, and the way that you can get it is go and be a supporter of ours on Patreon. When you go to Patreon, you can look at there's certain tiers that we have listed that we are giving these out to you if you are a supporter of ours.
Yep.
So if you love the podcast and you love what we do and you want to support our ministry, please go and become a Patreon supporter. And as a thank you, we want to give you one of these awesome stoneware mugs. And that's the coffee tip for today, because it's important. We want you to do this because they're nice.
These
Robbie,
are great. And to be honest with you, we won't send you the ones we've drank out of.
No.
We'll send you a fresh one. Like
that's
an important distinction.
Yeah, I mean,
here,
we're not just like washing these up a little and being like, here you go.
We have more than two.
Yeah, we have more than two.
Yeah, so.
And that's the thing. Each and every one of them is handmade. Yes, they're identical, but they're all handmade, and they all have their own little unique differences about them in the way they were crafted.
Yeah.
So in the way it feels, it's heavy. It's a good feel. That's something we talked about before, is that when you drink coffee out of a certain type of mug, sometimes it really does enhance your experience.
I've I've had people tell me when they drink out of these, they get smarter.
Really?
So I can't verify it. That's hearsay at this point. But
it's true.
You never know.
It must be true. Mm-hmm. If people are saying it, it must be true, right? That's what we talk about here on the podcast all the time.
Yep. So yeah, we'd love you to support us on Patreon, and we'd love to mail one of these mugs out to you. So go on there and become a Patreon member, and we would love that.
Yes, do that.
All right, on with the show. Marcia, we would love to hear about your history, how you got caught up in the New Age, what you did for many, many years as an astrologer, and then what led you out of it. So I guess let's start with your background and how you got caught up in the New Age movement.
Okay, well, here goes. So a lot of people often wonder, were you raised as a Christian, or were you, what kind of environment did you have growing up? Did that lead you to the New Age? So I usually start there.
Okay.
And I had a very kind of, you can't really classify my childhood. My father was a foreign service officer. Basically, he was a diplomat. And so we lived overseas a lot of my childhood. And we went to generic type churches.
Okay.
We lived in a place named New Caledonia, and it's a French colony in the South Pacific, and we went to a French church there. And in Berlin, we went to the Army Protestant services. And I really have, my memory of it is so vague. I remember singing some songs, and that's really all I remember.
Okay.
My father was an agnostic. So he wasn't hostile to Christianity, but he was not a Christian at all. My mother had been raised Southern Baptist in the South, in Florida anyway, which is kind of the South.
Oh, yeah.
And she, so she would say she was a Christian, but she did not, I never saw her read the Bible. I never saw her pray. So it's hard for me to say where was she spiritually at that time. I don't know. But she did think, my sister and me, she thought children should go to church.
Okay.
So we were taken to church. And when we moved back to the United States and we lived outside Washington, D.C. and Maryland, I started going to a Baptist church around the corner. I was very loyal. I went to Sunday school. I went to youth group. I went on Sunday night, and I would always do my Sunday school lesson, because that's just the way I was. I always, if I had a homework assignment, I did it.
Okay.
But the thing is, I didn't really get it for whatever reason. I didn't understand really who Jesus was or why he came. I mean, I knew the story about the cross, and I heard this, but it just had no meaning for me. And the Bible, I started questioning the Bible. Like, I started questioning the idea of hell.
Okay.
And thinking I didn't really believe in hell. I wasn't really sure everything in the Bible was true. I think I saw the stories about Jesus, it's almost kind of like fairy tales. I believed Jesus existed, but that was kind of it. And he was a good person, but really, for whatever reason, I was a very studious person. That just didn't get into my brain. And so I was interested in other belief systems. I was very interested in other religions. And I had friends in high school who were very different. I had a friend who was a Mormon, a friend who was a Quaker, a friend who was Baha'i.
Wow.
And a friend who was a freethinker.
Wow. That is quite a group of people, yeah.
That was kind of a typical of my spiritual path, It's just kind of like all out there, all over the place. Yeah. So I was not interested in becoming a Mormon, because the Mormon told me they went to church every night. I don't know. I guess maybe some Mormons do. That I was thinking, man, that's too much for me. The Baha'i girl wanted me to come to a Baha'i meeting. And so I finally agreed to come to one. Of course, my father had to drive me. I didn't have a driver's license yet. And my father was he was known for being terrible at directions. Oh. And we drove around for hours. We never could find her house. My father gave up. So I never got to the Baha'i meeting.
Wow.
And the freethinker and I had a lot, and the Quaker and I did a little thing with her out on the streets of Washington, D.C. at night. I can't believe we did this. We went out and handed out anti-war leaflets.
Oh, okay.
So I had this very kind of eclectic spiritual influences on me. And I had decided at that point I was not going to be a Christian.
Okay.
And so I decided I would explore spiritual paths. I was also at the same time interested in the supernatural. And I was interested in, what you would call powers of the mind, like psychic powers. And I was very interested in astrology. All of this was mostly from the 8th grade on to my senior year in high school. So I didn't do a lot of reading on those areas, but I had a strong interest there. And when I got into college, the interest continued, and I also added to that interest Eastern religions. I had to do I didn't have to. I chose to do an independent project on Gandhi, and I got very caught up with Gandhi and with Hinduism and everything what Gandhi did. That was very attractive to me. And I was still interested in the supernatural, so I would talk about it with a few friends, and I would read about astrology, and then people would ask me questions because they knew that supposedly I knew about astrology. So I had friends who would ask me things like, I really like John, but, he's a Sagittarius and I'm a Pisces. Do you think we would get along?
Okay, so
these
you're becoming a guide
questions.
To people. Yeah, sure.
So it's kind of like Dear Abby,
Yeah.
John's a Sagittarius. Are we going to get along? So that kind of thing was happening, and and there were other things like that. I did have I had 2 very strong supernatural experiences in college that convinced me there was this spiritual world out there that was hidden, but that you could find a way to learn about it or get in contact with it.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I had that idea in my mind. And after I got out of college, I started reading books and reading things. I was very interested in contact with the dead. Oh, actually, that was another. I actually had 3 very strong supernatural experiences in college. And so one of them was where this supposed dead man appeared to me. So I was very intrigued by all this, and I was reading all these books about these topics and believing them because people were writing about things that happened to them. So I'm like, yeah, wow.
And you had experiences that had happened to you, and so, sure.
Yeah, and I had experiences too. So I'm like, this is really true. And so I kind of continued along that vein for a while. And then I decided at some point there that I was going to really start studying. I was going to learn things in a more disciplined way. I wasn't just going to read books. I was going to learn things. One of the things that happened was that I took a course called Inner Light Consciousness. And this was a course being offered by this group that actually lived in southwestern Virginia. Now, at the time, I should say I was in Atlanta, Georgia. I went to college in Florida, and after a few months of being with my parents in Washington, D.C., I ended up in Atlanta, Georgia after college. So that's where I was living when all of this stuff took place that I'm going to talk about, becoming involved in the New Age, was in Atlanta. So I heard this group was going to teach this course, and it was being hosted by Quaker House, and I was going to meetings at Quaker House in Atlanta, and I still have that interest in Quakerism. And so I took this course, and one of the things we did, it was basically like a crash course in the New Age. I mean, they didn't call it that. But
yeah, sure, but that's what it was.
That's what it was. And so it really opened me up to a lot of different, things. And we did this meditation every night. And then on the last night of the class, he said, tonight, when we do the meditation was very important. This was very emphasized to us. It was a guided meditation, which means that the leader of the group led us through the steps of the meditation. And every night it was the same thing. And so we went through these steps. And then the last night he said, tonight we're going to do the meditation, but something different is going to happen at the end. You are going to be introduced to your spiritual master.
Whoa. Wow.
So,
wow.
we knew this was not a person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not a person of flesh and blood.
Yeah.
It was a discarnate entity.
Yeah.
So, of course, I was very excited. I thought, wow, my spiritual master, because I felt that I was sort of in this path where I was destined for this spiritual life, and these things would come to me because I was ready for them. And so you get this feeling that you're special, that you're on this path, that you have this kind of understanding, and that things will happen to you that will pull you along the path.
Yeah, you're unique, right? Like, you're not like everybody else. I have significance.
You're not like everybody else. You've kind of awakened to this spiritual thing, that most people seem oblivious to. So, yeah, you do feel very special. So that was what happened. So he led us through this meditation, and then at the end he had an extra thing that happened. And I saw my spiritual master, and I was like, wow. I mean, I liked my spiritual master. You guys are way too young to remember this movie star, but way back in the day, there was a famous movie star named Yul Brynner. Mm-hmm. He was bald, completely bald, but very handsome. At least women thought he was very handsome. Yeah. This guy kind of looked like Yul Brynner.
Okay.
And not exactly, but sort of. So he looked very wise. And I thought, wow, it's my spiritual master. So at that moment, I felt that he was with me. Wow. All the time. Okay. And so from then on, I started, getting more involved in other things. I went to a Tibetan Buddhist group. And honestly, I cannot remember if the Tibetan Buddhist group or the Inner Light Consciousness came first, but I think the Inner Light Consciousness came first. And then the Tibetan Buddhist thing, I think, was the year after. I learned how to do the Tibetan Buddhist meditation. I read their books. They were led by a guy named Chogyam Trungpa, who was known as the bad boy of Buddhism.
Wow.
Yeah, they do. They have bad boys in Buddhism.
Okay, that's funny.
Well, he would go to bed undressed with different women, undressed.
Okay.
He would get drunk.
Hmm.
And all of this, though, was seen as being very wise
Oh.
because he was a mirror to you. So he was like showing you your problems and your issues. Because if you get upset at these things, then you have to work through these issues.
Oh, I see.
That's
Okay.
how it was explained to me.
Huh.
Because actually, these people were led by this guy. Now, I never met him. His headquarters was in Boulder. He started the Naropa Institute, which is still there in Boulder, Colorado. And that's out where you guys live.
Yeah,
kind
that's
of.
close to. Yeah, it's not too far from
Kind of
Arizona.
that
Yeah.
area. I actually spent a day in Boulder as a Christian years later because I was in Denver and a guy wanted to go over to Boulder and I went with him. So I think we actually saw the building, the Naropa Institute, when we were out there. So anyway, so his Chogyam Trungpa. So after these meetings, because I was so interested, the people that lived in that house, the followers lived in that house. They would have refreshments, and I would stand around and talk to them, sometimes for over an hour, and they would tell me these stories. And that's where I heard these stories about him getting drunk and all this stuff. And I thought, and at first they told me that, and I was kind of shocked. And they said, "Oh, well, they said that's not bad. He's just showing us who we are. He's just the mirror." And they would explain this to me, and I would be listening like, "Oh, well, this is a new concept." I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, sure.
And so I thought, well, that's very interesting. I didn't totally buy into it, but I didn't totally reject it.
Okay.
So then they wanted me to come to the private meetings that they had on another night, on Monday nights, and they said they would teach me more practices that they wouldn't teach the public. And I thought, okay. And I thought about it, but I decided not to do it because I really felt like they were trying to recruit me, which I think is what was happening.
Sure.
And I was a very freedom-seeking person. I didn't want to be restricted. So I thought if I start going to these meetings and I'm going to get involved with this group, I'm not going to be able to go out there and explore all these other options.
You don't want to commit. Don't get tied down, right?
Yeah,
Right.
that's me.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be tied down. I was just kind of at the beginning of my exploration. So I said, I can't remember what I said to them, but I didn't do it. And I stopped going to the public meetings because I was afraid they were going to keep asking me to join. So I stopped going to them. And so then at some point later, I decided I would study some things that would help me along this path. I decided I would study psychic development and astrology. So I signed up for 2 classes at this place called the Foundation for Truth, which when you think about it, it's a very...
Yeah, that's a great name.
Yeah.
Here, you get the truth here.
Yeah, wow.
So they had all these classes like, past life regression, classes in tarot cards, astrology classes, psychic development classes, numerology classes, palm reading classes. I took like at least half their classes. But my first 2 were astrology and psychic development. And those really opened me up spiritually, not in a good way, but I thought it was a good way. So I was developing my so-called psychic powers, and I was learning astrology. In Atlanta at that time, there was a very unusual situation with astrology. Years before, a leading astrologer in Atlanta had gotten together with a city councilman, who apparently she was dating, and said, look, because astrology was illegal.
Oh, okay.
And it's classified as fortune telling, and this is still true in a lot of cities or counties. Local ordinances may still have something on the books against fortune telling because a lot of fortune tellers are con artists.
Yeah.
So it's illegal. So the astrologers in Atlanta were upset because they were not doing this to con people. They really took astrology seriously, and they really thought they were helping people with it. So they said, we've got to change it so that we can make it legal. So what happened was they decided that, okay, if you're going to practice astrology in the city limits of Atlanta, first of all, you have to prove you really know astrology. You're not just saying that you're doing it and then making things up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Secondly, you have to purchase a business license.
Oh.
So the city's going to get some money, from that. So that's what they did. So they came up with an exam that would be given every year at City Hall. And they formed a board of astrology examiners, and these were astrologers, and they would formulate and grade the exam. And then if you passed, you could go to the city and you could purchase your business license.
Okay.
So they set that up. This is the only city I know of in the United States that does this. Now, I have heard Las Vegas has something similar where I think you can get a business license, but I'm not sure they require a test. I don't really know. Sure. I never explored that. But Atlanta has this system, and I think it's very interesting that God had me there in the one city that had this particular system.
Yeah, that is fascinating, right? What's going on?
Because it gave me the credentials as an astrologer. Because I took the exam, which is 7 hours long.
7 hours?
7 hours.
Oh, that's a serious test.
Yeah, because the first part is all mathematical. They give you the birthplace and birth time. You have these books you have to use you have to first of all memorize the formulas, the equations to plot the chart.
Okay.
And then you use these books that give you the data, but then you have to do the mathematical formulas to do the chart. So it takes a few hours to do that. And I'm terrible at math. I'm awful at math. But I was so, determined to learn this that in those astrology classes, I learned it, And then I even had some private lessons with an astrologer in Atlanta, and he helped me prepare for the exam. So I went in there, and I managed to do that. And then after you do that, they give you another chart of somebody. It's a real chart. It's a real person's chart. They don't tell you who it is. And you have to write out an interpretation as though you're talking to the person. So they can see your people skills.
I see. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a legitimate test to become an astrologer, right? Like that's,
Yeah. And but of course it's based on astrology, and it's based on the idea that astrology is true and valid.
Yeah.
So that's why I tell people, if you see somebody who's licensed as XYZ, and that's kind of a dubious profession, that doesn't mean it has validity. It just means they were licensed in that profession by people who believe in that profession and have tested them.
That's a good point.
So, so it doesn't mean, that profession is okay because they got a license.
Yes, no.
Right.
It just means according to the standards of that profession.
Yeah, you jumped through the right hoops to get the license. Yeah,
you met the standards, right. So that's all that means. So I passed the exam. I went and bought my business license, and I actually had been practicing on people for 2 years before I got my business license. But then I started practicing professionally, so I started charging more. I never made a lot of money from it, but I was getting clients. Eventually, I taught astrology, and I was on the board of astrology examiners as well.
Oh, really?
Oh,
So
wow.
I was on the board that formulated the exams and graded the exams. And I was actually chairperson the last 3 years of the 4 years I was on there. And then I became president of the Astrological Society.
Wow.
There was a very, very active astrological society in Atlanta at the time, and very active. So I was a part of that. I was, I was on several committees. My life was really wrapped up in astrology. I loved astrology. I loved giving, doing the charts for my clients. Everything about it was great to me. I can't even describe to you how much I loved it. I just loved it so much. It was like my favorite thing in life. Now, at the time, throughout all this, there was a period there, like when I first got my license, my son was very young. I had married, and I had a son. And so he was growing up, and I had this son, and then the marriage ended. And then one of my clients offered me a part-time job where he was the boss.
No.
But what he wanted me to do was look at the data, the birth data of the employees, and give him advice based on the birth data.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
Yes, I was kind of like the secret astrologer on the premise.
But when you went in there, that wasn't like what he said your job was at the place.
No.
So people didn't know you were doing that.
No, I was a special projects coordinator.
Wow.
That's
okay.
wow.
That
That's
was your title?
interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
That was my title. Nobody knew why I was there.
Mm.
And what's really funny is that that they dealt with was an area that I have absolutely zippo experience.
No kidding. Wow.
And not only do I
Great.
not have experience in it, I have no talent in it
Oh
whatsoever.
man.
So I
Okay.
couldn't be more mismatched to what they were doing. But nobody knew that, and nobody really asked me. They didn't ask me about my background or what I really did. They just kind of, she's special projects coordinator. The boss is giving her stuff to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But I did let it be known to people I was an astrologer, but they didn't know that's why I was there. So people began to learn I was an astrologer. Some people were very interested and would come talk to me about it.
Yeah.
Other people just didn't care. So that was going on, and I was meanwhile president of the Astrological Society that year, and I started getting this very strange compulsion to go to a church. And I didn't know where this was coming from. I didn't want to go to a church. I didn't like Christianity. I thought Christians were very spiritually backward, and they were on a much lower level than I was, of spiritual involvement.
Yes.
And so I had no interest in it, and I didn't understand it, and I just kind of pushed it to the side. Well, it continued. It started in the spring, continued through the summer. I went to an astrological conference in Eugene, Oregon, came back to Atlanta, and it was still there. I decided, okay, this is probably from a previous life. I was a very strong believer in reincarnation, and so it was one of the first things I believed as a New Ager. I decided that there was leftover from a previous Christian life, and that I had to resolve it by going into a church. So that's how I talked myself to going into a church.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I went into a very large church in downtown Atlanta, and I sat in the back on the end of the pew because I was planning to leave early. The service began. Everyone stood up. They had music playing, and they had a procession from the back of the church. The ministers in the choir were walking down the aisle, and they were all led by a young boy carrying a cross. I guess he was about maybe 13, 14, something. He was carrying the cross. And as he walked by me, I felt what I call a waterfall of love falling on me from above. It was like this, it's so hard to describe. It was love falling on me. And I knew it was coming from a personal God, but I didn't believe in a personal God. Now it's some of this is funny when I tell it, because it's like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's like I didn't believe in a personal God. It was coming from a personal God.
Wow.
So I couldn't really reconcile it with my beliefs, but yet I knew it was true. So I ended up staying for the whole service. And then I decided I would come back the next Sunday. And I just started going to that church. It's really hard to explain why. I just felt I wasn't interested in becoming a Christian, but I just felt like I should go there. And then a few people who found out I was an astrologer wanted my business card, because it was a very open-minded church.
Okay.
It's an emphasis on the open-minded church.
Yeah.
It was an early progressive church.
Okay.
So, I thought, well, hey, I can get some clients here,
Yeah. Get
might
ready to
work
do
out.
business is get connections in the church. Yeah.
Another source for clients,
Yeah.
So I was happy about that. And I got into this class that was meeting with the rector of the church. It was an Episcopal church. And they were going through the Gospel of Mark. And I didn't understand anything. He would read a passage and discuss it, and I would just sit there. I didn't understand what he was saying, but for some reason I would sit there and listen. And then we would read, because we read something from the Book of Common Prayer at the end. There was a passage there that we read that grabbed me. I didn't understand what it was, who was saying it, why he was saying it, or what he was talking about. And what it was the speech of the priest when Joseph and Mary bring Jesus to the temple. And Simeon, isn't it Simeon, the priest?
Simeon, yep.
He says, "My eyes have seen." He gives a little speech about Jesus. And he's saying, mine eyes have seen thy salvation. He's talking about Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He's been waiting to see the salvation of Israel. And he realizes that Jesus is this promised Messiah. But he doesn't say that explicitly.
Yes.
So if you don't know anything like me, this speech doesn't make any sense because you don't know what he's talking about. But I don't know why. There was something about it that grabbed me. And also during the services, whenever they said the Lord Jesus Christ, it would have this effect on me.
Like an emotional effect, or just like a cognitive?
Not emotional. It was like it just kind of would hit me. I don't know how to describe it. It's like it would grab me.
Okay. Wow.
And kind of electrifying. And I don't know how else to explain it. And so that was happening within a few short weeks of after I started going to that church. That first Sunday was on Labor Day weekend. Around October, like maybe towards the middle of October, I started getting an impression from God that he didn't like astrology.
Wow.
And I kind of knew that Christianity and astrology didn't really go together. I sort of knew that, but I wasn't really thinking. I didn't care,
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm getting this impression from God that he doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, I don't understand. Why doesn't he like it? I'm helping people. So I just ignored it, of course. And I'm skipping a lot of things that happened here because there were things that happened at like Astrology Awareness Day at the Astrological Society, which I was in charge of. I was in charge of another person, and we always did it around Halloween, which, by the way, happens to be my birthday.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. So, but there was something strange that happened there I couldn't understand, just like some strange things happened at the conference in Eugene, Oregon. Well, now this impression becomes this impression God wants me to give astrology up. Now, this is in November, and it's so powerful. It is so powerful that I decide the night before Thanksgiving I'm going to give it up.
And you started going on Labor Day to church, and this is the night before
and this
Thanksgiving.
Is Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So this is less than 3 months later. This is, like maybe almost 3 months, but not quite. It's late November. I'm like, I'm just, and here, this again, I can't explain it because it wasn't logical for me to do this.
Yeah.
This is something I loved. I was still part of the Astrological Society. I was chairperson of the Speakers Committee. And I was chairperson of the Education Committee, and I was on the Speakers Committee. And I was very active. And so here I am, like thinking, I'm going to give it up. Well, plus I was doing this job for this guy part-time.
You're still working there doing readings for, okay. Wow.
Yeah. Now, it just so happened he was on leave. He was on leave from about Thanksgiving until sometime in January. So he was not going to be there. And he had left busy work for me. So I was doing busy work. So I decided to give it up. It was a very strange experience. I was sort of in limbo. I didn't know what was happening. My clients would call me and I would say, I'm sorry, I'm not doing astrology anymore. And they'd say, why not? And so some of them I would tell them, well, somehow it was separating me from God. And they would say, how was it separating you? And I'd say, I don't know.
But I know it was separating me, but I have no idea how or what.
That's honest, though. That's good. That's a good thing.
I don't know. I don't know doing it anymore. And they'd be like, did you have a bad experience? And I'd say, no, I haven't had a bad experience. And so then I'd give them the name of another astrologer. And I just was kind of in a foggy world. And I thought, well, maybe I should start reading the Bible. I'm going to church. I'm not doing astrology. I'll read the Bible. So I had a Bible, and I started reading Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. I just decided I would start with the New Testament. And I'm a very kind of organized person. So I'm not just going to pick a book at random. I didn't want to read the Old Testament. So I started with the first book of the New Testament. That was very logical to me.
Yeah.
And I started reading a little bit every night. And I'm reading. I don't really understand the point of anything. But I'm reading along, and one thing I noticed that the words are very pure. And I thought, the words in this book are so pure. And I kept thinking that in my head. And I don't even know that I realized, I don't even know if I knew what pure meant, but I kept
Yeah, but
thinking,
you just
I kept,
recognize there's something
yeah,
distinct about this.
yeah, there's something different. It's like the words are so pure.
Wow.
And so I'm reading it and I'm reading along. And shortly before Christmas, I started reading in early December. Shortly before Christmas, in Matthew chapter 8, I'm reading the account in there of Jesus on the boat with the disciples in the storm that causes them to wake him up. And he rebukes the sea and the wind. And the wind and sea obey him. And this story grabbed me, and I kept reading it over and over again. And as I'm rereading it, God opened my eyes. And I realized who Jesus was. I saw who he was. I realized I had been separated from God, and I had been going on a path against God. And I realized I needed Christ, and I just turned my life over to Christ at that moment.
Wow.
That's what happened.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is, because I didn't know anything, and so obviously God did all of this.
Yeah.
And I knew I was a new person right away, and I knew my old life was over. And so, of course, from that moment on, things were very, very different. I was sort of in the dark about things, but I would, at the church, I would tell them that I gave astrology up, and they would say, why? Some of them said, why? And I said, well, I said, and I didn't really know how to explain it. I said, well, in astrology, you're at the center of the chart. It's not God who's at the center. And so I said that sometimes, and so I didn't have any support because I didn't know anybody, in my life, it was all New Agers. And, so I was in sort of this no man's land, no woman's land for a while.
Yeah.
My boss came back in January. I told him I couldn't do the astrology anymore. He was very kind, and he said he would keep me on and keep giving me busy work. I think I was a single mother.
Oh, that's
my
cool.
marriage had ended, so maybe that's why he did it.
Yeah.
So I was still in that office. And then in April, this young man who worked there, who I knew had befriended me, and he never preached at me. He never told me astrology was evil. He would just ask me questions. And so he came into my office one day, and I said, I said, Jeff, I just can't believe a few months ago I was an astrologer, and now I'm a Christian. Because I had told him in January I became a Christian, and he didn't really say anything. And I don't remember the conversation very well, so I don't remember what was said. But this is April, and I said that to him. And he said, maybe somebody was praying for you. And I said, no, I don't know anybody who would pray for me. I'm looking right at him.
Yeah.
And he had this little smile on his face. And I said, oh, wait a minute. I said, were you praying for me? And he said, well, my young adult fellowship group at my church was praying for you.
Wow.
They're praying for me that whole year when all that stuff happened.
That is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that is one of the messages of my story, is that God wants people to know you can pray for people. It doesn't matter if they won't listen to you, if they won't come to church, if they don't want to hear the gospel. It doesn't matter if they're hardened, if they're an astrologer,
Yeah.
Wow.
or a psychic or a Wiccan or whatever. You can pray for them. Because God can reach anybody.
That is amazing. And just the
that's a
faithfulness
cool
of their prayers, and then how God is working behind the scenes answering that. That is amazing. What a story.
And they didn't know it. And they didn't know that was happening.
Wow. That is awesome. Yeah. That's encouraging to hear. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think it's encouraging for a lot of people. People tell me that helps them if they have relatives or a close friend that they've just despaired.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you never know what God's doing, and the circumstances in people's
exactly.
lives, you never know. And
you don't know. You can't always. Sometimes you can see it, but a lot of times you can't see it, and you have no idea what's going on in that person's life and what God's doing. You just don't.
Man, that's cool. That guy was praying for you. What a testimony. That's like the least thing we can do too, is pray for people.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's pretty simple to do.
How hard is that? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just it's especially interesting how you said too, like he didn't even talk to you that much about this. Like this is just
No,
something that he was doing silently with his prayer group in the
yeah,
background.
yeah. He would
That's
just
just
ask me
yeah.
questions. Like he'd say, "Hey, what do you think of the music today?"
Oh,
Uh,
And I love to give my opinions. This
sure.
is very opinionated astrologer. I guess
wow,
I still
yeah.
am opinionated. I'm not an astrologer anymore. And I would, and I'd be like, oh, well, let me tell you what I think.
Well, I'm sure that helped because it's turning the gears. It's helping you think, right? Because he asks you those questions. It's like, what do you
Yeah.
think about the worship? Like, how do you feel about all this?
Well, and
That's
Oh,
just
yeah.
not
being a,
worship.
Just
Yeah,
just
not
music in general.
not church
oh,
music.
okay, just
Yeah.
music.
Yeah, no,
Gotcha. Okay.
well, I didn't know worship. I wouldn't have even understood the term.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. But
That
still,
wouldn't
like,
even
yeah.
at that church. They wouldn't. I mean, we sang songs, but they didn't call it worship
Oh,
music.
I
okay.
see. But he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just being a good coworker.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He meant music. He actually meant secular music.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But well, still, that's really interesting. Like, he's just
yeah,
there. He's a good friend, and
yeah.
doing that, like, that's
Building a
wow,
relationship with you. Yeah.
He was a very nice guy. He
Hmm.
was very low.
wow, yeah.
He was very low key. He was a very low key guy,
Hmm.
but very nice.
That is
Very
awesome.
easy to talk. Very easy to talk to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after that point, where you realized he was praying for you and stuff, where did your story lead after that?
Yeah, I had this experience where I realized I went on a retreat with this church because I was going to get confirmed in the church
Mm.
as an adult. They had a group of adults who were going to be confirmed.
Oh.
And then they had all the younger people who were going to be confirmed, and we all went on a retreat. And at that retreat, I just saw some things that I didn't understand why they bothered me, but they bothered me.
Mm.
And I won't go into it, but I realized I had to leave that church.
Wow. Okay.
So I didn't. I ended up not getting confirmed there, and I left. And I was calling. I was using the phone book, calling churches and asking them questions. And I ended up at a church that was a little bit better, but still not really great. But the good thing about this church was that I met this married couple there who became my first Christian friends. And I really needed people who understood me, and they had been involved in the New Age and the Church of Scientology.
Oh, really?
They had,
Wow.
yeah, they had been Scientologists.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's out
which
there.
is evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is
Yeah.
like one of the most evil cults on the earth.
It's terrible.
And they had, they were telling me stuff, but they had been in the New Age too, and they totally. It's like I had this instant rapport with them.
Mm.
And so I spent time with them, and they would tell me stuff, and I kind of got this, I had this Christian fellowship with them, which I really, really needed.
Mhm.
Because other people at the church, I would tell them, I had been an astrologer and now I was a Christian, and they would kind of just look at me,
Yeah.
like I was an alien.
Yeah.
Or
I don't know what to
Oh,
make
yeah.
of that. I don't know what to do with
Like,
that
I don't know what to
information.
say to you. And so I wasn't connecting with people there really until I met this couple. And I think I really needed that. So that was a good thing about that church.
Mhm.
And, I learned a few things in the Sunday school class, but I'm telling you, I'll never forget. I was in this a single adult Sunday school class, and we had just finished going through a study. I can't remember what it was. And they were talking about what to do next. And they wanted to do The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck.
Oh.
And I knew as a New Ager he was not a Christian, even though for some
Wow.
reason these Christians thought he was.
Hmm.
And the leader of the group, the teacher, was sitting at the end of the table. I'll never forget this. And he said, well, I've been thinking we could go through this book, M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled. I literally jumped up and screamed from my chair. I was like, no!
Wow.
I literally jumped out, and everybody looked at me like, what? What's
Yeah.
wrong with you? And I said, no, we can't do that book. I said, we can't. He's like a New Ager. And they're like, what? No, isn't he a Christian? No. And the guy's like,
Wow.
okay, we won't do this book. I was so upset.
I'm
Oh
sure.
my gosh. And M. Scott Peck was into Buddhism.
Mhm.
Mm.
And he was, everybody thinks because he wrote People of the Lie, he was a Christian. No, he was not.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
anyway, I have a whole thing about him. I
Wow.
won't
Yeah.
too. So I'll never forget that moment. So
Wow.
I had things like that happen to me. I wasn't really getting complete solid, foundation there.
Mhm.
But then my son and I ended up moving. We left Atlanta and came up to Northern Virginia because my parents lived here. Oh, my job ended. My job that I had ended. So I had to come up here because I didn't really have any skills. I had been an astrologer.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I hadn't worked in a regular job in a long time. So I ended up here. And so I'm still here in
Wow.
Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up here. And then the Lord just started giving me opportunities to speak and share, and that eventually led to full-time ministry. So I've been in full-time ministry since 1998, and my mission, I'm technically a missionary, and I'm with Fellowship International Mission, which is a mission agency in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
It's a
That is
great
awesome.
Yeah, I've been with them the whole time. They've been really great, very supportive. And the Lord's given me all kinds of opportunities. I've spoken in 30 states. I've, had a lot of podcasts and interviews, and a lot of articles. I've written a lot of articles. So the Lord's given a lot of openings for dealing with what I deal with. And basically, I tell people the purpose of my ministry is, number one, to educate Christians on the New Age and the occult so they can be better informed and be more discerning, and so they can witness to other people. And secondly, to reach out to people in the New Age and the occult.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
amazing.
the two goals of my ministry.
What a story, huh? Like,
Yeah,
wow, listening to that, it's just phenomenal what God did and how he brought you to where you're at.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you a question. It's interesting to me because, a lot, not all, but a lot of our society is very scientific minded. And so the supernatural, like you said, is an afterthought. It's not a reality. And as believers, we know it's a reality. It's a real thing. And there are demons and there are angels. It's there. When you talked about your spirit guide that you were given at that class, was there a need to remove that at a certain point in your life, or did that kind of just leave you as you became a believer? What was there anything like that?
I'm glad you asked me that, because I didn't say anything about that. Actually, after I trusted Christ and was saved, I sort of forgot about my spirit. I actually felt like I had several spirit guides, but he was like the main one. And I actually just kind of forgot about them.
Okay.
And then a few months later, after I left the other church and I found the second church where I made my friends, I was going to join that church. And on the day that I was going to go up, I think it was Palm Sunday. No, yeah, it was Palm Sunday. I was going to go up there and make a public profession of faith in Christ. And I felt very ill. And I was sitting in the pew, and I felt really bad. Like, I just felt bad. And it's like, I feel so bad. I don't know if I can walk up the aisle there, but I did. And then I went home, and I felt so bad I had to go to bed. My son was not there. He was with his dad. And while I was lying in bed, I know this is going to sound strange, but there was like something that came in the room and was very, very angry, actually very hostile to me. And I knew it was my spirit guide. And by the way, in case people are wondering, spirit guides are demons.
Yes,
So just so people know.
for sure.
They're fallen angels. So there was this intense hatred directed right at me. And I don't know if this is true or not, I felt like he had made me sick. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I felt at the time. And so I said, you can make me sick and you can even kill me, but then I'll just go be with Jesus. So it's like, and then he was gone.
Wow.
So it was just very, very weird. Now, the reason, whenever I tell this, I always say right now, today, I don't believe in talking to demons. I mean, I know that Christians can disagree on this, but this is my view, because I don't want people to think I believe in it, since I told that story. I was a new, I was brand new, and I didn't know anything, and I think what the reason God allowed that to happen is I had not realized how evil my spirit guide was. I had not realized that he was a demon and that he hated Christ. Because I just didn't think about him. now, and God, I think God was saying, Marcia, you need to recognize who this spirit guide was that you thought was so great. You need to acknowledge, you need to see him for what he is. And I personally think that's why God allowed that to happen.
Wow.
So, of course, that made a big impression on me.
Yeah,
And
of course.
Yeah.
so I think that God just took him away after I said that. I don't think I can make a demon go away, but
Of
God
course,
can.
yeah,
Right.
God can do that.
Yeah, of
we don't
course.
have
Yeah.
power; it's His power.
So,
Yeah.
So I always tell people, I would pray to Christ. If they ask me about something like that, I say I would pray to Christ and ask him to remove a demon.
Yeah, that's
But
so
anyway,
fascinating. It's just interesting what you said, because when I was a kid, so I became a believer when I was 4. Right, I was brought up in the church, and
wow,
yeah, and so
like the opposite of me.
yeah,
Like
very opposite.
I was
But
like many years later.
yeah, but the thing that was weird is, like, I grew up in northern Arizona in the mountains, and when I was little, I was freaked out of this thing in my room at night. And every night, I remember, I'd be crying. I'd go into my parents' room and I called it a specific name. And, they thought, yeah, just a little kid who's afraid. And then my mom was like, maybe there's more to it than that. It might not just be a kid freaking out. And so she told me one night, she said, hey, if it comes back, tell it you want to follow Jesus and he needs to go away. And I did. And I came into her room and I said, hey, it came back. And I told him about Jesus, and he said it's not coming back anymore. And it's like kind of similar to what you said.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, experiential, anecdotal, but there is a spiritual reality out there.
Yeah.
And Satan comes to kill and steal and destroy.
Right.
And so I think that his minions and they're trying to ruin and corrupt us no matter where we're at or what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely real. And we can read in the Bible. Jesus, Jesus talked about Satan as a personal being.
Yes.
He cast demons out of people.
Yeah.
We read about Satan. There definitely is. Satan is real, and the fallen angels are real. So that's a definite reality.
It is, and again, I think that we believe it as Christians, but sometimes living just in secular society and the ethos of scientism, we forget. And when you hear stories like this, it comes to the forefront, and you go, "Oh yeah, that's right. There is this battle going on out there that's not flesh and blood."
Right. And then of course there's the people who are into it too much. I have to deal with them a lot in my ministry.
Yeah.
They're into it in extreme ways where that becomes the focus.
And that should never be.
Everything's about the demons and fighting the demons and blah blah, and that becomes their whole thing.
Yeah, and then everything's a demon, right?
No,
it's not my sin.
Yeah.
That's not
you
good.
got to be balanced, know, and because God only gives us so much information about them, He doesn't really tell us. He tells us enough, but He does not tell us everything.
No, He doesn't. If
Which
you
is
go
probably
through,
a good thing.
I think so, because we might be fascinated with them more. Angels too, like Satan's not talked about that much in the Old Testament, especially.
Right.
Like a couple of times. It's not a lot. So
no, it's very. It's not a lot at all, and I think some people can tend to get fascinated by it. Yeah.
Well, real quick before we end, what are a few tips? What are some tactics you would give to people to say, hey, if you have a friend in the New Age, here's kind of the things that you should talk with them about?
Yeah, I never really gave my little talk on the New Age. I just told my story.
Yeah, and that's all right. Hey, that's great.
Talk on the New Age I can do.
Sure.
If you ever have me back, I can do that. But just to say what the New Age is, I think I should define it. It's a network of beliefs that come from Eastern religions, Gnosticism, and a movement called New Thought.
Okay.
So the New Thought movement, which claimed to be Christian, is what we see in the ideas of positive thinking, and you create your reality with your mind and your words, affirmations. So Norman Vincent Peale, for example, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, was very influenced by Ernest Holmes, who was a New Thought pioneer who co-founded the church with his brother, the Church of Religious Science. So that's a New Thought church. Unity is a New Thought church, and Christian Science came out of the New Thought movement.
Mm-hmm.
So New Thought is very much with us, and it's very much a part of our culture. The Human Potential movement has a lot of connections to New Thought. So I'm just throwing that out there. So, because if people haven't heard the term New Thought, they may think, well, who cares what that is? And what I'm saying is that it's definitely a force in the culture.
Okay.
And the New Age adopted a lot of New Thought ideas, like Christ consciousness, that came from New Thought. And that's a New Age. It just took it straight from New Thought.
I see. Okay.
So there's a lot of overlap there. But I don't know if the New Age is so vast, so you can have people in different areas of it, and it can be very fascinating to a lot of people. So I think, of course, it depends. Are you dealing with a Christian who sometimes get fascinated with it, or an unbeliever? Of course, if it's an unbeliever, I think talking to them about what is it that fascinates you about this? Why are you interested in going to a psychic? Why do you think the psychic can help you? How do you think this? I would ask questions. How do you think the psychic knows this stuff?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and why are they wrong sometimes? Because my psychic development classes, I took several of them. A teacher, my favorite teacher, in fact, said the best psychic on his or her best day is only 85% correct.
Wow.
Best psychic on his or her best day. So most of the time, they're not even that.
Yeah.
So. Okay, why? Why are they wrong sometimes? I was, and then I think just to mention a book called Tactics by Greg Koukl.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
It's a good book, and it's basically how you talk to people, how you can ask questions to get them to think. So it can be applied to somebody in the New Age. It can be applied to someone, a Hindu, or, somebody who's into, any kind of Buddhism or whatever. So I think or just an atheist. So, you can ask questions to get them to think. New Agers don't believe in absolutes. So you can ask questions like, ask them if they believe in absolutes. They're probably going to say no. Is there absolute good and evil? No. Okay, well, how do you know? How do you determine what good and evil is? How do you decide? Get and ask these questions, because if there's no absolute, then it's up to anybody to say what good or evil is.
Absolutely. And then that statement, is there no absolute, is an absolute statement.
Yeah.
Right?
If you say there's no absolute, if you say there's no absolute truth, or there's no absolute good or evil, you just made an absolute statement.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. So, I always I ask them questions, and I try to get them to think. And I do this if people email me, or if I talk to them. I ask them I've talked a lot to Wiccans in my ministry. I had a lot of Wiccan and witch clients when I was an astrologer. There's quite a few of them in Atlanta. And I even went on some retreats with them, because my chiropractor was a witch.
Oh, okay.
And so she was very active in her community, her pagan community. I went on retreats. She would invite me, because even though I wasn't part of that community, I was an astrologer, and a lot of my clients were in that community. And so I've talked to Wiccans, and I've asked them things like, they believe, do no harm, do what you will. So I've asked them, like, well, how do you define harm?
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
how
that's
do you
a good question.
determine if you do harm and you didn't mean it, is that harm? Do you ask for forgiveness? It's really, if you can just get a conversation going, if they're willing to talk, and ask them about their beliefs, ask them what drew you to Wicca. What is your spiritual background is another good question. Because they might say, oh, well, I was raised in this Christian household. We went to church every Sunday. My parents were Lutheran or Baptist or whatever. Then you can say, well, why do you reject that? What led you to reject it? And they may say, oh, well, there were so many rules I had to follow.
Yeah.
Or people just, they acted like they were Christians, but then every day they, acted like everybody else. And so it didn't seem to mean anything to them.
Yeah.
So see, judging Christianity on a false standard, or they don't really even know what it is.
Yeah, that's great. And you can unveil all that by asking good questions.
Yeah. It's another good question to ask. And I always like to ask, what is your spiritual background? I remember I asked that of one guy who was a pagan, like he was into not witchcraft, but it was neo-paganism. And he said, well, I was raised a Christian, and I said, what was the denomination or church? And he said, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, okay.
Well, that told me a lot.
Yeah, that says a lot about that. Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh, okay. So, it just, I think if you're praying, and asking the Lord to lead you, the Holy Spirit to lead you, if you really want to talk to this person and want an opportunity to witness, then, God will help you.
Yeah, no, that's for sure true. Well, those are great tips, Marcia. We're so grateful just for you coming and sharing your story with us. This has been really enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's always great to hear about how God's working, from our vantage point, across the country in a completely different place, working on you in the past and bringing you to himself. That is just so cool to hear.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you and sharing it.
If people would like to, know more about your ministry, where can they find you online?
Okay, ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org is my website. I have many, many articles there that I have written over the years. I'm always adding to those articles on New Age and occult topics, on New Age books. I've written articles on some New Age books. So there's a lot of information there. And on Facebook, if you're on Facebook, I have a ministry page called Christian Answers for the New Age, and I post things there, and actually it's public. I think people who aren't on Facebook can actually see it.
Okay.
I've been told that. So I can't test it out because I'm on Facebook. So
sure, but you can just search Christian Answers for the New Age on Facebook, and you'll find it.
I think maybe some articles will come up or something will come up. So I don't know.
Great. That's awesome.
So,
we encourage our listeners to go and check out Marcia's ministry and all the articles. If you want more information on just being equipped, like she said, to be able to understand and discern the New Age, and then to be able to be ready to go and defend your faith and to share your faith with other people, make sure you check out her website, check out her books. And Marcia, again, we're just so grateful that you came on our show. Thanks so much for sharing your testimony with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks.
All right. And then thank you guys for being with us today on Christ, Culture, and Coffee. We will see you next week.